Hey friends, what's up? Today I want to show you something really magical, and that is how you can use Svelte runes to create spells. So what is a spell? Well, basically a spell is just a reusable utility. For example, you might have a local storage spell. In the past you might have used Svelte stores, but in Svelte 5 we have runes, which is a new reactivity system. And the beauty of runes is that they work inside and outside Svelte components. So today I want to explore a couple of ways how we can use runes to create spells from functions to classes, which should be really interesting. Alright, but before we get started, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also support me by becoming a patron. Alright, so here I have a simple count which I can increment, so you can see there is nothing special. But let's say for example that we want to persist the value of the count when you reload the page. For that we can use local storage, and that is really simple to do in Svelte. So we can use the effect rune for side effects. And if you don't know what side effects are, well, that's basically anything that's happening outside your components, which can be a fetch call, it can be talking to your database, or manipulating the DOM. In this case, we're using a browser API local storage, which is a side effect, right? So we can come here and we can first get the data from local storage. So let's check if it even exists. So we can say item, and then we can use the local storage API. We can say get item, and let's just name it count. And then we can check if the item exists. In this case, we're going to reassign the count value to item. But this is not enough because we actually have to parse the value from the local storage using JSON. And of course, besides JSON, there is his brother Jamel, but JSON is really awesome, right? So we can say JSON parse, and then we can just pass the item, and that's going to be it. And as you can see, if we go here, nothing is still going on because we actually have no value, so we don't persist anything. So that's our first effect, and then we're going to create another effect. So we want this one to rerun. The first one is going to run just once on page load. And this one we want to run each time the count value gets updated. So we can say local storage. In this case, we want to set the item, pass it the key count, and then we can use JSON, stringify, and then we can just pass it the count. You don't have to pass any dependencies here. Svelte already knows that it has to rerun this because count changed. So if I save this and go to the browser, even if I refresh, you're going to see now we have this key value in local storage named count. So now I can increment this up to 4. I'm going to refresh the page, and you're going to see it's going to go from 1 to 4 because it's going to first render on the server and then in the browser, right? And if I go up to 10, now we're going to refresh the page. It's going to use the initial value, and then it's going to get the value from local storage. And there's also another way you can do this. So for example, since we want this effect to run once, if you're using sveltekit, you can just import browser. So you can know if you're in the browser context. So in this case, I'm just going to take these two lines. I'm going to remove this effect. I'm going to say if browser, and we can import this from sveltekit. And then we can just copy and paste it over here. And it's going to work the same as before, since we only want this effect to rerun, right? So I'm going to save this. And even if I go here and clear local storage, I'm going to refresh the page. It's going to create this key value count with 0. Let's go up to 4. Let's refresh the page, and you're going to see everything works the same as before. Alright, that's cool, but let me actually show you the beauty of Svelte runes. So let's say that we want to create our reusable function. We can just copy and paste our existing state. We don't have to use another piece of reactivity system like stores and etc. We can just use what we have. So let's create a use local storage spell. So I'm going to name it use local storage. I'm going to pass in a key, which is going to be a string, and then the value is going to be any for now. And we just need to copy and paste our existing state. And of course, we need to make this function more generalized. So instead of passing count here, this is just going to be a generic key, which we passed. And instead of count, I'm going to rename this to something like storage. And I'm going to create an object here and pass it the value as the initial value. So we can just do this. We can just say return storage, and now we have to create this storage. So we can go here and let's just say let count. We can say use local storage. Let's pass it the key, which is going to be count, and let's pass it the initial value 0. And here in a template, we have to say count.value and count.value. That's it. And I forgot about another thing. So we have to say here storage.value. And that's it. So now I made another oopsie. Since I have storage.value, we have to say here storage.value, and that's basically it. Let me see, everything looks great. Let's clear this, refresh the page. You're going to see everything looks great. Let's just go up to 4, refresh the page. As you can see, everything works great. Alright, so now we can take this existing code and we can place it outside of this component, and it's just going to work like magic. So where are we going to put our spell? Well, inside of this sveltekit project, I'm going to go to source lib. And the only important thing is, once you name this file, I'm going to name this index, but make sure your file ends with svelte.ts or js, whatever else you're using, because this is an indicator to the Svelte compiler that we have runes inside. So I'm going to put our spell here, and inside of here, I'm just going to export this, and that's basically it. So now going back to page.svelte, let's also import browser here. That's it. So now we can go back to page.svelte. We can remove this and actually, let's say use local storage. So now this is going to be imported from lib and everything should work the same as before. So now even if you refresh, let's go up to 10 and boom, how beautiful is this, friends? Alright, but let's say for example that you pass in something more complicated like obj. So you can say use local storage object and then let's say we pass it A1, for example B2, and we want a nicer user experience using TypeScript. So for example, if you look at the type here, it's object with value any, and that kind of sucks. And this is actually not really that hard to type. So we can actually go here and then we can pass in a generic. And generics aren't really anything that intimidating if you don't know what they are. How you have arguments to functions, basically generics are just type arguments. So you can pass in t here, but this can literally be named banana or whatever else you want. So you can pass t, and then we're also going to make this value t, because we don't know ahead of time what this is going to be. And the only thing we have to do is type state. So this is also going to be a generic, it's an object with a value, and whatever we pass into the value is going to be of type t. Alright, so now we can save this, and again, if you go here back to the page, now when we hover over this type, we're going to see we get value, which is a and b number, and now we get great auto-completion in our editor. Awesome, how beautiful is this, friends? Alright, so let's do the same example using classes. So why would you use a class and not listen to those people who talk about performance? Like for most use cases, it really doesn't matter. It's personal preference if you want to use a function or a class. But in some examples, let's say for example that you're making a confetti library. So you have 1,000 of particles and etc. Of course, a class is more performant because a function is more expensive. So it really just depends on personal preference or what you're doing. If you really notice performance problems, then reach for a class instead, right? Don't just listen to people who have their dogmatic opinions. And I'm just going to show you how simple this is. So I'm going to say export class local storage. And now we just need to define two fields. So I'm going to say value, and you can just use state like this. And that's basically it. And now we're also going to have a key which we're going to set to nothing. And now we're going to create a constructor. So we're going to pass in a key the same as before, and we're also going to have a value which is going to be any. Alright, so now we can set this value to value, and let's set this key to equal this key, and that's basically it. This is how you initialize a class. And we can even be more prudent when we have a class, so we can make things like serialize and deserialize, so it's really neat and tidy. So let's create a serialize method, and we're going to create a deserialize method also. Alright, so inside serialize, we're going to accept a value, which is going to be any for now. And then we're just going to say return JSON stringify value. That's basically it. And the serialize is going to be the opposite. So we're going to take in a value, which should always be a string, and then we're going to return json.parse.value. That's basically it. So already we can see using a class we're more incentivized to split things out, make things a lot more cleaner. Because of course that function looks pretty since it has a couple of lines. But your code, of course, isn't always going to look that simple, so classes are really awesome. And actually, we can take most of the code that we have inside of this function, which is really neat, right? So we can go here, let's go inside the constructor, we can paste this code, this should be the same, and now we just need to change a couple of things. So inside of storage.value, this is going to be this value, and instead of JSON parse, we're going to say this deserialize because we're fancy like this, so you can flex on your friends knowing all of these fancy words. And then here, instead of passing key, we're going to say this key, and instead of JSON stringify, we're going to say this serialize, and we're going to say this dot value. Alright, so now we have this simple class we can save. As you can see, it looks almost the same, like there is barely any difference. Alright, so now we can go here to plus page.svelte, and we're just going to swap this out. Let me just remove this. So let's just import local storage, and then we can say new local storage. This is going to be count, and let's save this. So now I'm going to clear local storage. Let's refresh the page, and you should see everything works. The only thing that's complaining here are types, so let's actually fix this really quickly. So this is how we type a class. We can also pass in a generic here. We're going to pass t here, and we can also say st here because there's some weird bug with types right now. And then of course, instead of any here, we're going to pass in t. And even for these functions here, we can be more strict. So this is going to be t. We can be explicit even about what we returned. So we can say, hey, this should always return a string, and this one should always return t, right? And actually, this looks pretty good to me. Cool, so we can save this, and now if we go back here, we're actually going to see this is a local storage number, and of course you can pass in a type or whatever else you want, but TypeScript is going to infer most of it. So now when you have count.value, you have this great autocompletion. If you refresh the page, you're going to see everything works the same as before. How beautiful is this, friends? I also have a cool trick you can use if you don't want your users to use classes. So maybe you prefer to author your code using classes, which is perfectly fine, but maybe you don't want your users to use classes for whatever reason. Well, you can just define a function, give it any name, local storage, and then just pass it a key. And then we can also say that the value is any, for example, right? And just return new local storage, pass it the key value, and that's basically it. Now you just need to export this function, and now your users don't even have to know that they're using a class. Okay, there is one last thing that I want to show you. So remember how we passed an object here. And why is that? Well, if we just passed in value here, there is no way that this would work because this is just JavaScript, right? You can't just return a value and for JavaScript to know that this should update. So you would have to return a function with a value and also an updater function to update the value inside the function. And Svelte really can change how JavaScript works. But Svelte does something else for you. It has deeply nested reactivity if you pass in an array or an object. And what this basically means is that Svelte uses a proxy under the hood to know when this value is updated. Otherwise, if you just passed in a value, you would have to return a function or define a getter and setter here. So you would have to go here and you would have to say get banana or value, right? And then you would also have to specify a setter for the banana. And that's basically it. And I also want to show you this example on the class since we're using it right now. So here on the class, this is the same principle. So here we're using this $state rune, and under the hood, what Svelte is doing is creating a getter and setter on the class for you. So here we can actually turn this value into a private field, and now we're going to get complaints because we changed it. So let me change this value. And this is completely optional. We don't have to make this value private. But now we can actually specify a get and set method ourselves. So we can say get value. And we can also say set value, and we can also pass it a new value. Here we just have to return this found value. That's it. So now we have complete control over this instead of Svelte doing it. And here we can just yoink this line since we don't need an effect anymore, since we already know when we're updating this value, right? So now we can just go here, we can say if browser, and then let's just set the local storage inside of here. But of course, we also have to update the value. So we can say pound value equals new value. And we can also keep everything here. So we check the local storage, and I think we also have to set it once. So for example, when this gets initialized, you can also do if like this. Let me just do it quickly. So we can do this, else we can do local storage set item, right? So if it exists or it doesn't, we're going to set it. Alright, cool. So now again, we're using the same class here, and I'm going to clear the local storage. And now we have complete control. So now when I refresh this again, we're going to set the local storage, and now everything should work the same as before. Let me see what is happening here. So we can go here back to our code, and this is happening because we're setting the value after the fact, but we should actually set it before, so we get the newest, freshest value. So now when I clear local storage, let me refresh the page. Now I go up to 4, refresh the page, everything is great. I can go up to 10, and boom, bam, thank you, ma'am. Easy peasy lemon squeezy like that, friends. I hope you now understand the power of runes. If you like what you're seeing, don't forget to like and subscribe, and you can also support me by becoming a patron. Thank you for watching, and catch you in the next one. Peace!